Welcome to the MadTech Podcast from ExchangeWire, bringing you the latest news and views from the world of adtech, media, and marketing.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the MadTech Podcast by ExchangeWire. I'm Lindsay Roundtree, I'm CEO of ExchangeWire, and today I am delighted to be joined by Zac Selby, who is SVP Global Solutions Data and Technology at dentsu. Welcome, Zac.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you here. And joining us from ExchangeWire, our fearless leader, finally back from Australia, Rachel Smith, CEO of ExchangeWire. Hello.
Hi there. Thanks very much. I mean, what an intro. Fearless leader, definitely. I mean,
Sure.
I have just been in Australia for several months, obviously facing down all the fearful things that happen in that country. I'm talking more about animals than humans. Yes, exactly. Creatures than humans.
Yeah, definitely. And we have two Aussies today. So I've already said, if you want to have an Australian argument, go ahead. It's fine.
No swearing though. Yeah.
No swearing.
Oh, no. You're allowed to swear.
Swear as much as you like.
Good, Zac.
Yeah.
That's all good.
People seem to enjoy that more. So please feel free to swear. And rather fittingly, our first story is about IAB Australia. So obviously, as an industry, we've been talking about measurement for years. And now Australia's IAB is putting a formal stake in the ground. So it's launched its new Future of Measurement initiative. And it's one of the organisation's 3 stated strategic priorities 2026. And they've kept the scope deliberately broad. It isn't just about audience numbers. It's about examining signals used to capture ad delivery, frameworks linking media activity to actual business outcomes, and of course, how AI is changing the way measurement models are designed and applied. And it doesn't seem to happen in isolation. They have aligned themselves with global efforts in trying to kind of get on top of the measurement challenge. So IAB US is Project IDOS or EDOS, I'm not sure how you say it, and a new WFA and CIM cross-media review in Europe. So Australia obviously sort of tacking along to that and helping understand that there's a challenge with measurement in the region. The first wave of findings are due to be released in Sydney in September. And I want to get your thoughts on this. Kind of, what do we think? Do we think that this is a great thing for understanding measurement, or do we think it's too broad? Is it too diverse in terms of stakeholders? Zac, I'm going to come to you first and get your thoughts on what this means for measurement in Australia and generally.
Yeah, look, I think it's brilliant. And one of the things you called out that sticks out to me immediately is sort of outcomes. That's a pet peeve I sort of have, sort of a misalignment of media metrics to outcomes. I think within the media landscape, planning does quite a good job of this, but when you move into digital activation and the metrics sort of available to sometimes optimize towards or deem success on, for lack of a better term, are not always correlated to business or behavioral outcomes. So I think if there's a way to address that, it would be fantastic. And on top of that, right, once that's established, the IAB always does a fantastic job with standardization. And what I would love to see is a consistency in methodology. No matter the media metric, we're not always comparing apples to apples. You can think of something as simple as a video completion rate. It means vastly different things based on how long the video is, whether the video is skippable or not. So 100% completion rate can mean 2 vastly different things given the platform and the format itself, or something more sort of, that we've seen as an emerging metric in recent years, such as attention. Some people deem it on eye gaze data, some people deem it on, on page signals. So I think consistency in methodology is also like vastly important. So if this helps address that, I think it's fantastic. And what's sort of always been the case, and maybe even more of the case now with sort of more and more walls and ecosystems, is sort of integration. So yeah, metrics that correlate to business outcomes, that a consistency in their methodology is fantastic. But if you can't deploy them everywhere, it's all for null. So I think if it can address those things, it would be fantastic.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. Rachel, what are your thoughts on this? Obviously, based on everything that Zac was saying, we're going away from kind of looking at who clicked to who actually grew a business and drove revenue for a business. Do you think that this framework, this initiative is going to go in the right direction and take us where we need to get to when it comes to measurement?
So whether it truly takes us where we need to get to, it maybe, remains to be seen. But I think it's certainly heading or trying to drive the industry in the right direction. Because if we think about it, following on, Zac's thinking there, the entire advertising and marketing ecosystem is moving towards outcomes focused activity, right? Whether they like it or not. And that's not to say that there isn't still, I think you're both right, very much a focus on short-term metrics. I think everybody in the industry accepts that's not where we should be, and we need to be moving on from that. But I also think that the sort of the component parts of advertising and marketing these days is just naturally driving us towards more outcomes-based frameworks and outcomes-based activities. So anything that helps to sort of move the industry in that direction will be really beneficial. And we definitely need a better measurement framework to kind of guide us and take us there. So, as to whether this particular, in the first instance, what we're talking about is a study to understand, where the marketplace is at in terms of measurement in Australia. No better people in the industry to be doing this than IAB Australia. I'm a huge fan of IAB Australia. Shout out to Gay and JJ. And also, they've got a lot of experience on the research side of the industry. I mean, I know IAB chapters globally spend time and investment in research to help pull standardization frameworks together. But that is one of, Gay's personal areas of interest. She's a researcher by background. So in order for them to be spearheading this project for the marketplace there in Australia, they'll be taking this extremely seriously. So I think in the first instance, that's going to be a great piece of work to gather data right across the industry. They're going to brands, marketers, publishers, media owners, tech platform providers. So that's going to be a really comprehensive piece of research, which will provide lots of interesting data points. Then it's going to come down to conversations and action across these industry stakeholders to actually turn this into something that's practical. And I think that's where the really interesting work will come. And that's probably not going to be until 2027 and beyond. And as you mentioned, Lindsay, they're already keenly looking at what's happening in the US with their Project EDIS or IDIS, as you said, whatever it's called, and Project Origin here in the UK, because those projects may be a little bit further advanced just in terms of the data and the output. And now they're trying to actually implement those frameworks. What does that look like practically on the ground? So I think this is a great initiative. I think, like I said, with the leadership of IAB Australia, it's going to be a really great study, high quality study. What happens next is going to be the thing I'm particularly interested in. But in general, absolutely heading in the right direction.
And we've been talking about standardization for what feels like a very, very long time when it comes to measurement metrics. Is this genuinely a technical hurdle, or do you feel there could be a sense of, certain media owners might be worried about standardization uncovering certain practices that they don't want to necessarily be uncovered? Am I being unfair here?
I mean,
nobody wants to answer. I'm not surprised.
Allow me.
Very quiet.
Maybe Zac feels a little more, compromised. But I'd say no, you're not being unfair, Lindsay. I think that standardization has been difficult from a practical point of view. There's probably plenty of practical reasons that it can be complex and not an easy thing to implement. But I also think that we've talked about this for years. This industry has been opaque by design. When I say this industry, I mean the marketing and advertising technology side of advertising and marketing. I think that standardization has been difficult for some because the tools and techniques that they've used have naturally not lent themselves to any form of standardization, and that's been in the interests of some in the industry. We're now in a period where we really need to uncover all of those vested interests, not that we haven't tried before in the past, but I think that it's becoming less and less possible for measurement standards to be just based on outputs and activity. The entire business world in marketing and advertising is moving towards outcomes, and that's where measurement needs to go to.
Yeah, and on the standardization piece as well, but beyond sort of fragmentation, just the speed of change within digital makes it sort of an ever-going conversation, right? We
Absolutely.
maybe get to like a point of like 80 to 90% within programmatic, but there's always sort of new components that need to be factored in, and then retail media enters the scene, and we got to start again with standardization there. And as we start getting to a nice point with retail media, now there's this whole thing with LLM search, which of course can leverage some SEO sort of measures of success, but it means a different thing in that new landscape. So there's so much change unfolding all the time, and new environments and new formats and sort of new insights uncovered that, it's not always sort of, I guess, on individuals, but it's more so just the pace of change within the digital landscape that just dictates these things. It makes it quite complex and difficult to land on standardized concepts.
Well, does that then make initiatives and audits like this even more challenging? Because obviously the results will land in September. We run the risk of there being so much change between now and then, especially with AI, that actually what they find could be open to so much interpretation or could be irrelevant by September. Is that not a concern or a challenge for anyone that works within standards and within infrastructure?
Certainly. I think what will be, for me, more interesting out of that is less about sort of the definitive outputs, but more around some of the frameworks that we can use moving forward to speed up standardization when changes happen, and sort of like a set of golden rules, so to speak. I know, Rachel, you've touched on sort of outcomes to a degree. And for me, I'm really interested from a perspective with like business outcomes, like ensuring that everything that is done within measurement has an ability to be correlated to that and what is actually sort of driving results for the brand.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the thing is that, as with any good study in a fast moving industry, you have to just put a stake in the ground somewhere, right? So you're quite right, Lindsay, and also Zac, that we could get to September and look at some of those findings and think, God, the world's moved on quite a lot, in the intervening few months that it would have taken to pull all of that together. But you have to put the stake in the ground somewhere. You have to take a snapshot view at some point. And I think then the real work in this will be in the working groups and the committees that are structured around it to try to make sense of this and mold it into a usable framework, taking into account all of those complexities that Zac, you've touched on, and Lindsay, you've intimated. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach to anything in this industry. And the wide variety of channels across which we execute marketing and advertising make it impossible to have a truly standardized approach. So we are just going to have to arrive at a professional framework that enables us to do the best we possibly can, taking all of those things into account. It won't be perfect, but it will be something, or it should be something that's usable and that can be agreed upon across, the sort of all the corners of the industry.
Completely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, I'm going to bring us on to our next story, which has an outcomes and measurement related angle to it, if anyone enjoys a segue. So back in January, the US Patent and Trademark Office quietly granted Google a patent that, I keep saying patent that, good God. They granted a patent that, depending on how you read it, could actually fundamentally change the relationship between brands and their own websites. So what they're doing here, how this works is Google scores your landing page in real time. And if it decides that the page isn't converting well enough, so based on bounce rate, based on activity on the page, it will generate a replacement. So there's a threshold it has to meet. And if it doesn't meet that threshold, Google will automatically generate an AI replacement and insert it into paid search results. So basically the landing page will change for any penny paid ad. They're not asked about this. They just do it without your knowledge. And potentially they bill you for traffic sent to a page you didn't create or approve. To be precise about this is focused on transactional shopping-orientated use cases. So there was a lot of conversation, certainly in the SEO world, back when this first launched, that it was going to be on every single landing page. This is only on paid placements. It's only on transactional shopping-related placements at this stage. And the filing is focused on so it's not Google replacing your whole website, but the director of travel obviously is quite stark. Organic click-through rates dropped 61% last year on queries where AI overviews appeared, and nearly 70% of all Google searches now end with a single click. So this patent is a logical extension of the same dynamic. Basically, your site becomes a data feed and Google owns the whole customer experience. Now, I want to get your thoughts on this because some could argue that this is terrifying and another example of Google owning the entire consumer experience, the entire consumer decision journey, funnel, whatever you want to call it. But also there'll be some brands that go, great, I'm so terrible at this job. We can't get it right. Google doing it for us. Thank you very much. That's fantastic. So Rachel, I'll come to you first. Kind of what do you think about this? What does this mean for brands and advertisers that kind of pay to appear on Google Shopping?
I mean, you've hit on a really interesting angle there, Lindsay, which there will be some brands and advertisers that will find this a relief because it's a job they feel they don't do very well themselves. And then that kind of speaks to an area of, Google's business where we know they do really well, which is basically automating and making the advertising and marketing sort of journey really, really simple for those brands and advertisers that don't have a huge amount of resources and that don't have big budgets to dedicate towards other staff or other, or even agencies to do this for them. So, that sort of, small, medium-sized business part of the ecosystem is what Google's always been really good at creating products for. So, maybe those brands will feel a sense of relief. Personally, when I read this story, I just thought it was another example of Google doing exactly what you also just summarized, Lindsay, which is trying to own the full journey. And the overwhelming feeling I had was, could we just get some, reasonable, clickable advertising links in LLMs already? Because I feel like that will just take us away from where we currently are, which is this weird world between traditional search and AI search. No one's using traditional search anymore. I mean, I say that, offhandedly. Of course, lots of people probably are, and people are still using Chrome. But what you're getting isn't traditional search results. You're getting AI overviews, and then you maybe are scrolling down to some paid-for search links, but you most times probably aren't. You most times are probably even moving right out of that AI overviews page to actually go and look for things separately or to, research and cross-reference that information elsewhere. So I feel like this is Google absolutely maneuvering themselves into a space where they own the full journey. I think it's actually more problematic potentially for publishers and media owners than it is for brands and buyers. If we're talking about the purchase journey, I mean, as you said, Lindsay, it results mostly to clickable links when there's a purchase being made, then that obviously separates it from brands and media owners. But I just think it's moving consumers into an environment where we no longer expect to type in a query and see a bunch of clickable links where we can select where we go next. I think that world is gone already. If it didn't feel like that was already obvious in the last kind of 6 to 12 months. I also think that, though, in Google's defense, advertising kind of mirrors what's happening, what happens in terms of consumer behavior in the way that we move around the internet. So, and that makes sense, right? Brands and advertisers just want to follow the eyeballs and consumer behavior so that they can place ads in front of them. And Google's just kind of trying to push that along a path that feels logical for them as well. So I get it. I get why they would want to say, well, look, if there's no reasonable clickable site link that's going to actually drive a conversion, we'll just put that in there for you. But at the end of the day, it obviously needs to be cleaned up. People can't be paying for search results that aren't actually driving them to their own website. And then the final thing I thought on this was it brings me back to the point that I've been making since the start of the year, which is we're absolutely operating in a world where brands are kind of becoming almost like media owners. So they need to have one eye on their content, however they're producing that, whether that's just being produced in a social media environment or whether it's a website. And then media owners and publishers need to be thinking of themselves as brands as well. That's that rant over.
No.
Wow. A lot of really great points there, Rachel. Enjoyed that very much. Zac, I'm fascinated by your opinion on this as well. Like, what do you think about this? Rachel raised some really good points there. And I want to understand kind of from your perspective, what that means for, how a brand might then, like what it means for reporting. It's not yet clear what level of data we'd get, like a brand would get from this. So kind of what direction does it take campaign planning and reporting and data analysis generally?
Yeah, definitely. I think let me take a step back first, and then I'll address that question because it's a very big topic. And I was, enjoying sitting back there listening to Rachel. I think we should just caveat everything we say here, right? With that, at this stage, it's a patent, right? So every large technology company patents things for strategical advantages. So anything we discuss downstream of that, let's keep that in mind, I suppose. But thinking if it did come to life, I think there's some positives there. Like there's been a lot of fear about sort of the state of the open internet with LLM search and traffic disappearing. And maybe this signals some intent that, players like Google still see an important role for the open internet, albeit that might take a different form, but still delivering traffic to the open internet. So I think maybe that's some of the positives we could see out of that. I actually think the integrations with a feature like this would more natively link to LLM search than traditional search. And in some ways, that could be a great thing, right? If LLM search fundamentally understands the logged in users, understands what they're looking for or where they are in that purchase journey, has access to everything about your brand or your site, and drives them to a highly curated landing page, that could be quite a positive experience. Obviously, as anyone as a user of AI knows, at least at the moment, doesn't always get it right. So that's sort of, coupled with some brand or reputational risk, or maybe not meeting sort of a consumer need if the AI curates that landing experience incorrectly. But I do think there's some positives there with sort of like signaling still a need for the open internet, which we all know because LLMs are trained off the open internet, but still to sort of share that traffic around, although it might be different. Sort of then linking to your question around sort of maybe what it means for advertisers. Again, there's some positives and negatives there that are somewhat reflected for publishers. On the positive side, again, if we understand a consumer, where they are in their conversion journey, we understand what product to show them and what information of that product to show them, that might aid conversion rates or even lifetime value. And then again, there is a risk if brand information is shown incorrectly or not in the manner that aligns to your brand guidelines. So there could be reputational risk as well. So it will all sort of live and die by the way it's rolled out. In terms of measurements, I mean, God, it's a large subject. I mean, like in basic senses, I mean, it would just sort of, I think it might be an extension of what we're already seeing with AI traffic. So maybe less traffic, but more qualified traffic that converts more readily. So that's what we've seen from a lot of LLM search, that traffic has dropped, but the traffic that comes across is more intent driven and tends to have a high conversion rate. Again, take that with a pinch of salt, because I'm sure every advertiser and industry is different, but broadly speaking, that's been some of the impacts to date.
And do you think that, I mean, obviously there are some brands, some industries where it feels like this would not necessarily be great to get involved with because, there could be legal compliance issues, et cetera, that Google have on top of. Do you think that for those kind of industries, it could signal a kind of a need for them to go after more owned channels where they kind of feel they have more control over the entire system, like CRM, like email, for example? Or are they becoming less and less owned as well, maybe?
Look, potentially, but I mean, like to some degree, like an AI curated landing page is just one step adjacent of an owned property, right? So
very true.
I think it will just live and die with how they roll it out. Hopefully there's like quite an intuitive process and it's almost automation over AI where there's sort of predefined fields and you populate that and the AI can only generate from those predefined fields, and therefore sort of accuracy is 99%, hopefully 100%, because it's only sort of, suggesting off those populated data fields. So it could be sort of an owned operating methodology to a degree if it's rolled out. So I know it's not the perfect answer, but sort of it'll live and die with how they implement it. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. Rachel, were you going to say something?
Well, just one of the things I thought about as well when I was reading this and listening to Zac, I'm thinking about it again, is that this is, you're right, Zac, to be much more sensible in your approach to answering this, certainly than I was.
Rachel's
this is early
very gung-ho.
This is early days. It is a patent. But it does make me think about what the future of brands, or I suppose, and media owners, but what the future of brands' websites look like. Because, at some point, if we're operating mostly, or we're navigating our way around the internet mostly via the content that we want to consume, which is kind of more in an entertainment and social media bracket, and then the stuff we want to know about, which mostly will happen or may well happen in something that's like an LLM, then what's the point of websites again? So they either have to be, they've always been thought of as the shop front window and therefore discoverable in a search environment. But if they're not discoverable in that way anymore, so sure, they could be discoverable in an LLM environment. But I just think there's something about what websites will eventually look like as a result of this. And I mean mostly brands and advertisers' websites. What do they, and I started thinking about that, Zac, when you were mentioning, well, maybe how this is rolled out is a pro forma with fields that you've got to complete with basic information, and then that's what what the AI generated page is built off of. So maybe that is what it looks like in early days, and down the line then, and especially if we're talking about small or medium-sized brands that don't really have a lot of capacity for developing things like websites that might otherwise be redundant for them.
Yeah.
So then what do websites look like? Are we operating in a completely different environment where we now no longer have standalone, really sophisticated websites for every brand? Don't know.
Yeah, I do love the point around sort of, for smaller brands making things accessible. I think that has been one of the nice pros of AI, sort of easing integration for someone who maybe doesn't have all the resources. But I mean, definitely a big rabbit hole with sort of like, what does the future of websites look like? And I think that's sort of like tied to what does the future of the internet look like? If I knew the future, I'd probably be retired on a beach. But if I had to guess, I would say, I think the LLM search environments, and we already sort of see this slightly sort of changing to be how people access the open internet. And I think very soon, already they sort of are to a degree, like the LLM search functionalities are just going to be LLM browsers. And more importantly, like how will people interact with LLMs? I think we envision it today that we still use it as some sort of website, but what happens if sort of voice controls get so advanced and you no longer need a website, but you need sort of preconditioned information for a voice functionality to relay it back to you, and everything's done via a voice command. So that there's still a lot in the air. And I think the future of, obviously, publisher websites are tied to the future of the internet, and how that will manifest is still evolving and probably will for a number of years.
It's so true. It's a really good point, because actually and it ties us back to the fact that, as you correctly pointed out, Zac, this is a patent. Nothing's happened yet. Like, this is very much kind of theoretical at this stage, and it could remain that because things are moving so quickly that actually the nature of a website changes so much within the next 6 months' time that this patent becomes irrelevant. What Google wanted to get out of it, they don't need to get out of it anymore, and we're moving on to something completely different. But I'm going to move us on that note, something that is real, which is like that. Very good. I'm very good at links here.
It was very smooth, Lindsay. Very smooth.
Yeah. I'm hot on it today. So Apple are going to be introducing ads into Maps. They confirmed it this week, launching under a new consolidated platform called Apple Business Connect, with an auction-based model where advertisers pay per view or per tap. And it does look like Apple's going out of its way to highlight this product is different from Google. So one ad per search result, clearly labeled and with a privacy setup that means location data stays on device and is never shared with advertisers. It feels like they're going for like a genuine differentiator. The addressable audience is significant. There are over 1 billion active iPhones, skewed toward higher income users in premium markets. And the timing doesn't feel that accidental. Apple's services division is already past $100 billion this year, a year. And with its multi-billion-dollar Google search deal under regulatory scrutiny and AI obviously eating into digital search behavior, Apple obviously is looking for maybe a new revenue stream that it actually has control over. And Maps feels like the next piece of the puzzle. After the App Store, Apple News, and the quiet rebrand from Apple Search Ads to just Apple Ads. Interested in your thoughts on this. What does it mean for users of Apple Maps, which I thought was no one, but it turns out like loads of young Gen Z people are using Apple Maps. I didn't realize this. Ask people in our team. They are, yep. don't go near Google. But I wonder what it means for Apple from a revenue perspective, why they're going down this route. Is it because they, are worried and they need new revenue streams, or is it because they just, that's logical step of owning an advertising ecosystem? And what does it mean for advertisers that can get involved, and what does it mean for users? Zach, I'm going to come to you first. Lots of questions there. Feel free to pick anyone you like.
No, sure. I'll start with what I know, which maybe is what does it mean for advertisers? It's exciting. I mean, you touched on some of the benefits of reaching Apple users. Obviously, Apple users are reached today, but they're not sort of super addressable today. So bringing addressability to that ecosystem, which has been something that's been quite sort of walled off in the past, is exciting because they are a premium audience. They are a large audience, and tapping into them more directly is an exciting prospect. It's obviously sort of at least from sort of a logical assumption, a very brand safe environment. So there could be a lot of good work done for advertisers. For users, if it's rolled out correctly, I think there could be minimal disruption, or sometimes it could even be additive. I think there's sites like, or maybe like map-ish based sites like an Uber, like Snapchat Maps. I think even, I'm actually a City Mapper user, so I don't use either. But on City Mapper, the ads aren't too intrusive either. And on many of these apps, like sometimes the ads are additive, surfacing something with a high review near you, if that is how sort of the ad unit rolls out. So from a consumer perspective, it might be beneficial, little disruption, and they're comfortable with the trade-off. And then I guess further for advertisers, based on your service or product, it could have even more benefits, right? If you're something with you have a physical location, great tactic to sort of boost footfall. If you're someone who does a lot of out-of-home or experiential activations, great to sort of drive more presence or sort of recall based on those activations. So there's a lot of opportunities. I guess nothing is like net new because there's sort of map-based or location-based strategies to date, but making those, bringing Apple users into that addressable environment, if it is done tastefully, just allows us to further boost those strategies that exist today in a premium way.
It's a very interesting point, and you mentioned out of home there, which I think is an interesting one to bring up because Apple and Google haven't got any skin in the out of home game. They haven't got any inventory. They haven't got any media space. Is this a way of getting in with that channel and trying to kind of own more of the ecosystem that could tie things together? Rachel, what's your thoughts on this?
I mean, out of home is such an interesting and exciting marketing channel these days, right? Because it feels so much value in being able to connect that out of home environment with other things that users might be doing, right? So anything that can kind of draw a line between you being in a particular location and being exposed to out-of-home advertising to anything more personalized, like something on your phone, is really interesting and a really exciting area of advertising. And it wouldn't surprise me if, Google and Apple want to find ways to get involved in that side of the industry. I think that I'm not at all surprised that Apple have decided to do this. I do think, as you've intimated, Lindsay, that it's just an obvious opportunity to grow revenue in this particular area. Whether it feels like they need it immediately or not, it's just an obvious opportunity. Such a high intent based environment. Why wouldn't you introduce advertising? And as Zac really nicely outlined there, a lot of the advertising that we're already exposed to in a map environment, whether it's Google Maps or whether it's City Mapper, also massive fan. Hate it when I go to a place and there's no City Mapper. I'm like, what? Someone should have told me this before.
Don't trust train times from anywhere else, right?
Yeah, exactly. But someone should be on some kind of like travel, top tips. Don't go to any of these places that don't have City Mapper. Anyway, point being, we're already exposed to quite a lot of advertising in a map-based environment, and quite frankly, I barely noticed it. Like, I even had to stop and think, sorry, what are the ad placements in Google Maps? And
Same.
And then I'm like, oh, okay, it's the purple things, not the red things, and because there's reviews and there's all sorts of things connected to stuff that comes up on Google Maps. So anyway, suffice to say that I'm sure Apple's going to make that advertising experience just as unintrusive for Apple users as Google's managed to make it, and Citymapper and others. So it's more of a beneficial environment. And then further to your question, Lindsay, about out of home, if both Google and Apple can find a way to make that map-based advertising experience correlate with some out-of-home advertising opportunities, I actually think that's genius. To me, this is the really exciting, interesting side of the advertising and marketing industry. This is where people have really got an opportunity to make advertising so high quality that it resonates and entertains and gives you something useful. That's kind of what you want, right? So personally, I think that would be super exciting. The only thing that I thought was a potential issue here is that I'm not an iPhone user, so I'm not in this category, and it amuses me how. Anyway, that's a whole different segue. Let's not get in a whole different rabbit hole. Let's not get into that. But the difference between sort of Android users and iPhone users, I find really puzzling.
So apparently you're poor and I'm rich. So there we go.
Exactly. All of that demographic.
Yeah.
And also, and apparently I'm poor and you're rich, even though our phones cost us the same. So I don't get that either. But anyway, I just think that there are a lot of Apple users that probably feel very protected by the privacy arrangements that exist in an iPhone environment, and they'll be deeply suspicious of anything that comes across as targeted advertising. So maybe that connects a bit to your point, Zac, that Apple users haven't been terribly reachable because there's been lots of privacy changes that have been made in the iOS operating system that has meant it's been harder to target those users. So maybe this Maps experience, this is where there's a potential challenge for Apple. They're going to have to make sure this Maps experience isn't too intrusive. But I think they've got plenty of opportunity to do that because I feel like we're all in agreement.
Exactly.
Advertising in Maps is great.
Yeah, exactly. And look, you can never say anything certain, but more likely than not, they're going to keep it in that walled-off environment. The addressability factor may not be so addressable. It might be sort of more contextual alignments you can make within that ecosystem. So I'm sure they'll find a way to balance it both. And they generally roll out quite premium formats, right? So I'm sure it will be done tastefully, not too intrusively. Again, this is guessing just based on sort of Apple's track record and who they are as a company and their sort of design philosophy. But based on that, the assumption is that it would be done tastefully and not too intrusively. But time will always tell.
But does their USP, just to end on this point, does their USP of safety, of privacy, and of operating within that walled, closed environment, does that and the fact that that then drives a sort of lack of data coming back to the advertiser, does that then create a challenge in trying to justify and prove ROI of a channel like that?
That's a tough one.
Yeah, exactly. To be honest, I know people are rightly concerned about privacy, and that might be one of the things that iPhone users care about. But at the end of the day, if the technology that they're using is doing useful things for them and they feel as though they have a level of protection that means that the data is not going to, you know what, we could get lost in this for hours because let's think about where that data does go, who holds on to that data and what jurisdiction governs that data. My point being, I'm not sure how safe any of our data is in any of the devices that we use. But if people have got that perception, as long as the perception is protected enough, I don't think people will care. What they want is a piece of technology that works really well and that looks good and that makes them feel as though they're still part of the rich gang that own iPhones instead of Android phones. So I think they have to really botch it up to make people feel like that was something that, meant they needed to stop using iPhones.
But what about an advertiser investing in that as a channel? Would you be able to justify ROI to them? Because if they can't get the data back.
Yeah, they'll get some level of data back, right? But
yes, of course.
It can be sort of, media metric results-based data, which might sort of suffice the investment they've placed, and it's not highly intrusive on the individual. I think also we sort of envision new digital ads as being sort of as addressable or as sort of malleable as maybe a programmatic ecosystem. But for all we know, Apple might start this off with sort of something that resembles more of a direct IO contextual buy and give you some sort of basic metrics back, which protects consumer privacy. Advertisers might sort of still lean into this space because they sort of see the value of being in that premium environment. I think maybe a good example is when Netflix first launched ads that didn't have the same functionality as some other CTV providers, but everyone knows it is a highly premium channel. It's got a lot of value, and they're happy to test it before sort of features advance in time, which it has. So people sort of recognize what is a premium environment and are generally happy to invest as long as they're able to see some metrics. I don't think they need to sort of see every single piece of addressable information points about an individual to deem that something is a quality investment.
No, completely fair enough.
And I think that's a really good point, Zac, and connected to that is, which is where in a very haphazard way I was trying to go. Since I don't think this will be a negative user experience, that premium environment will maintain and still be considered a premium environment. And advertisers, therefore, will still want to invest money into that channel, regardless of what they get out of it, except they'll want to see some results, obviously. But the data, won't necessarily be as important to them as just understanding that still is as premium environment as it was 12 months ago, 18 months ago. And so I'm broadly targeting or reaching the people that I want to reach. And as long as they're managing to sell something off the back of that investment, they should be happy. Because you rightly point out that Netflix environment, I still personally recognize that advertising environment as completely different to every other streaming service, because it is. My lived experience of it is totally different. And so, if Apple get this right, and if iPhone users don't feel any different using their device than they did 12 months ago, then that still maintains the premium environment. Advertisers and brands are still getting that premium environment. They might not be getting all of the data back, but that's the way the cookie crumbles. And if they're getting some kinds of uplift and managing to sell things, then that will be all they care about.
Excellent. I'm going to end it there. It's been wonderful chatting to you both. Thank you, Zac. Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Lindsay. It was a pleasure.
There was no Australian argument, which is a shame, but maybe next time.
And that'll be for the unseen edit, right?
Yeah,
That's
of course.
it.
Oh, yeah.
I'll make some clips.
I'll make some clips.
Over
Don't worry, guys.
Something like
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening and watching, and we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the MadTech Podcast, brought to you by ExchangeWire.